Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a few moments. Welcome, everyone. This is the webinar on new life for Diablo Canyon and energy in California, presented by the American Nuclear Society. I am Stephen Arndt, the president of the American Nuclear Society, and I'll be your moderator for today. We've got a very exciting group of people to come and speak with you about Diablo Canyon and all the efforts that's been done to keep it running. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of quick program notes. If you have any questions, and we hope to have a lot of good questions today, please use the Q&A function. I know I go between different platforms and I always forget which one to do, but if you have questions for the panel today, use the Q&A function. The event is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all event registrants later today. Additionally, if you would like a certificate of attendance for today's event, you can get that on request. You can find that in the meeting chat function. It's askanything@ans.org. Just send them an email and they'll get that out to you right away. Finally, we ask all participants to adhere to the ANS Code of Ethics and Respectful Behavior Policy. If you're not familiar with that, that can be found at the ans.org website. Now we're through all that, I want to say how excited and happy I am to be here. There's been a lot of work in this area. ANS and lots of other people have been involved with this particular project. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Sievert Wang is going to give us an opening talk. He works at the Breakthrough Institute as co-director of the Climate and Energy team. His current research focuses are on mineral and manufacturing supply chains for low carbon technologies, decarbonization of heavy industries, climate and clean energy policy, and on earth science. So, Sievert, thank you again for joining us. Please go forward.
It's great to be here. It's crazy that it's already March 2023. In a alternative, darker timeline, Unit 1 of Diablo Canyon Power Plant would have shut down for the last time in around a year and a half from now. Back in September, California's grid, CAISO, hit an all-time high load record of 52 gigawatts, far above CAISO's forecasted 2022 peak of 45.9 gigawatts. I listened to a recent podcast episode with CAISO's CEO, Elliot Meinzer, where he described the titanic efforts that were needed to secure, and I quote, every last megawatt of available generation capacity to meet the California grid's needs on September 6, 2022. So in this reality we're in, it seems incredible that not long ago, the state was on a path to retire 2,256 megawatts of low carbon, reliable, low cost electricity generation capacity. How did we ever think that this was a smart idea? And what caused California to reconsider? What happened was this. First, new environmental regulations in 2010 forced many of California's nuclear and fossil fuel plants to consider expensive upgrades to their cooling systems. Then, at the height of post-Fukushima anxieties, anti-nuclear activists and California policymakers exploited a temporary shutdown of the San Onofre nuclear generating station caused by technical issues, successfully opposing restart of the plant and forcing Southern California Edison to decommission the facility in 2013. This left California with just one last nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon, raising the possibility of a future California without nuclear energy. And so for the next several years, a coalition of very excited California stakeholders seduced themselves into believing the state could retire Diablo Canyon and replace it with new clean energy, wind, solar, pumped hydropower, while accommodating California's growing energy needs and climate goals, and even save money by doing all this. Meanwhile, California regulators insisted that in order to save some plankton, crustaceans, and fish eggs, Diablo Canyon needed to reduce its use of seawater cooling and install expensive new cooling towers. Anti-nuclear activists and lobbyists wrote biased research that highly exaggerated the cost of continuing to operate Diablo Canyon. And finally, California policymakers offered PG&E a very generous deal that would allow PG&E to recover the money it had budgeted towards equipment upgrades and the cost of relicensing the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and to protect PG&E workers that might be at risk of unemployment if the plant were to shut down. At the time, PG&E was concerned about saving costs and worried about potentially losing ratepayers to new community electricity aggregation schemes. And so PG&E accepted this deal in 2016. A few years later, the state legislature passed SB 1090, promising that Diablo Canyon's closure would not cause the state's carbon emissions to increase. And so everyone looked forward to a bright future where Diablo Canyon would be seamlessly replaced by additional clean energy while making electricity cheaper for Californians. Well, we all know what happened next. A few months later, the Camp Fire exposed the challenges in our grid infrastructure and sent PG&E to bankruptcy, while making it clear that our grid would need expensive upgrades to ensure wildfire safety. Meanwhile, the state's electricity demand was continuing to increase. In August 2020, we had rolling blackouts. The state water board, as it turned out, granted exemptions to 4 dirty fossil power plants to keep using seawater cooling. So funny about that. The pandemic created a supply chain crisis. None of the pumped hydro that anti-nuclear activists and lobbyists had promised would replace Diablo had been installed. There was increasing community opposition, slow permitting, transmission infrastructure constraints, and interconnection backlog that all made it hard to get new wind and solar built. Electricity rates kept going up. Trade policy enforcement has made solar equipment hard to acquire. Russia invaded Ukraine. Now Silicon Valley Bank has collapsed, momentarily putting community solar developers in mortal fear for their continued existence. So it was becoming obvious that many of the assets needed to replace Diablo, new geothermal, new batteries, new solar, new offshore wind, all of which are great, would not get built in time to come online before the plant retired. Fossil fuels would fill in the gap. When Diablo Canyon shut down in 2025, California would be dangerously short on generating capacity and would have to rely more on fossil fuels. If CAISO was then forced to black out customers again, the California government would have failed triply to meet promises on reliable electricity, climate goals, and lower energy costs. So I think it's easy to see now why state policymakers ultimately decided why they didn't want to be blamed for shutting down Diablo Canyon in the middle of an electricity crisis. California is still not out of the woods. Electricity demand in the state is going to continue to increase. California is doing a lot to deploy electric vehicles and electric appliances in new buildings. And so Diablo Canyon's dependable 2,256 megawatts are worth their weight in gold. The California Energy Commission just determined that Diablo Canyon fulfills a key role in California's grid until 2030, and I expect that the plant will continue to provide valuable power for decades beyond that. But despite how sensible the decision to keep Diablo Canyon open looks to us today, it was a difficult fight, not an easy process at all, convincing the state government to reverse course and support PG&E in keeping the plant open. It took a lot of effort from energy experts, federal leaders, communities, climate activists, and pro-nuclear activists to stop California from making a huge mistake. Isabel, who's going to speak next, has been instrumental throughout that campaign and deserves a significant slice of the shared credit for the victory. And I guess we're turning things over to her next to tell that side of the story.
Thank you, Siebert. Yes, our next speaker will be Isabel Bomick. She's a nuclear energy influencer and fashion model. She is passionate about energy equality, women's empowerment, and science, all of which have led her to promote nuclear energy. She uses social media to captivate people's attentions and educate them on why nuclear is such a powerful tool to fight against climate change and energy poverty. With that, brief introduction. Isabel?
I just want to say, Seaver, what a great introduction, and you set the stage perfectly. So I'm Isabel. I'm the creator of Isodope, which is an online persona that promotes nuclear power. And as Stephen said, I'm very passionate about solving climate change and energy inequality. I'm also the founder and president of the Safe Clean Energy Foundation, which is a nonprofit that was created with the intent of delaying the closure of Diablo Canyon. Now, as Seaver was mentioning, the prospect of saving Diablo Canyon a couple of years ago even was very, very grim. This was taken by everybody as a done deal. This is a decision that is never going to be changed. As a matter of fact, pretty much everybody I talked to disencouraged me from pursuing, delaying the closure of the plant. But I was, even without all of the information that we have now, I was noticing some shifts. One of them being, of course, the fact that California is in an energy crisis, has been, and will probably continue being. The second one being the mandate, the electric vehicle mandate, which would increase the need for electricity overnight. Then, of course, you have California's clean energy mandate, you have a federal clean energy mandate. So all of these things were happening at the same time. And I looked around and said, shutting down Diablo Canyon makes no sense. And of course, now in hindsight, we're all in agreement of that. But back then it was a little bit unclear. I think we were all deluded that, as Seaver mentioned as well, that we were gonna magically replace a gigantic output of clean energy with solar and wind and hydro, and everybody would be happy and kumbaya. Of course, the world doesn't work that way. We like our energy now, and we have serious goals to get to clean energy. So I will tell a little bit about the story of, how that whole process, how my advocacy work unfolded. So I noticed all these things, started talking to a bunch of advocates. Some of them had completely given up, but I found a small but mighty group of people who agreed with me and were eager to put all their effort and time into this. And we started meeting regularly, started communicating with the community around Diablo Canyon. And then as things progressed and we started seeing more and more studies coming out, including I think everybody here is familiar with the Stanford MIT study that really highlighted the importance of keeping Diablo Canyon open. So when that study came out, we felt really empowered and emboldened with all the information to go out and start being very public with our goal to delay the closure. We put together a rally in San Luis Obispo, which was, I can say this, the biggest pro-nuclear rally in California. It was attended by hundreds of people. We had incredible speakers from, Mothers for Nuclear, which is an organization in San Luis Obispo that promotes nuclear power and wants to save Diablo Canyon. And I think that really showed not only the rest of the public, but also politicians that the perception around nuclear power has changed. It is changing, and it is happening even faster now with all the geopolitical issues that Seaver mentioned, the war in Ukraine, the need for energy independence, and our clean energy goals. Together with that rally, we put out a letter that was signed by 79 of the most illustrious leading scientists in the country, urging Governor Newsom to delay the closure of the plant. That letter was read and was received by Governor Newsom, and he acknowledged it as a part of his rationale for considering the delay of the plant's closure. So I think that the most important lesson I've learned from all of these things was the power of advocacy, which I think has been underrated a little bit. Most people believe that they individually cannot make a difference, and I completely disagree with that. I think that politicians care about people's opinions, and when you make your voices heard, you can have a real impact. So I really want to highlight the importance of that. And the second most important lesson was the power of working together with several organizations. Through this process, I partnered with everybody on this panel, and several other organizations like Mothers for Nuclear, Stand Up for Nuclear, Generation Atomic, carbon-free California. And as we got together and as we started collaborating, real things started happening. So I just wanted, if there's anything that you take out of my ramblings, is that one, you can have an impact as a single individual advocate, and two, collaborate, find other people who have the same goal and work together.
Thank you, Isabel. Next, we're going to hear from some of our colleagues at Pacific Gas and Electric. We have with us today Maureen Zawick and Tom Jones. Maureen is the vice president at Diablo Canyon. She has over 34 years of experience in the nuclear industry and is responsible for the continued operation of Diablo Canyon, including license renewal, as well as all of the state of California legislative requirements associated with Diablo Canyon's continued operation. Tom is the Senior Director for Government Relations, and his main areas of responsibilities are to ensure regulatory strategies are successful, engage in stakeholder and environmental stewardship, and working in the compliance area. He's been with PG&E for 22 years and previously worked with the California State Legislature. So, Maureen, Tom.
All right. Thank you, Stephen, very much for that introduction, and also the opportunity to be on this panel today to discuss Diablo Canyon, California's largest carbon-free energy producer and, facility. We're here today in our offices at Diablo Canyon on beautiful Central Coast. And again, really thank you also, Seaver and Isabel, for your remarks as well, and looking forward to the questions and so forth. So just to give a little background on Diablo Canyon and what happened last year, some of that's been talked about already. I'll start with that, and then I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about the paths that we're on and certain actions that we're taking and upcoming milestones. So first and foremost, why did we get the call? Isabel talked about it, and Seaver a little bit, that what Governor Newsom was seeing as far as the modeling, also seeing the demands, for electricity and so forth, a record of, 52 gigawatts last summer, right? So we received the call because Diablo Canyon is one of the top highest performing nuclear plants in the nation, if not internationally. We're safe, reliable, clean, affordable generating facility, and, provide, approximately 10% of California's energy and 20% of California's carbon-free energy. Those are real numbers. Those are what we need right now with all the climate issues, supply chain issues, tariffs, drought up to this year, and other factors like that. Our units were to expire in November of 2024 and August of 2025. And so right now we are in a posture of turning that decision, helping to path forward to turn that into extended operations at Diablo Canyon. So just, why now also was a discussion last summer. Well, we had a lot of things to plan for. And that was why some of the legislation was introduced at the end of June and then also September 2nd. The end of June legislation was Assembly Bill, 180. That was a reliability reserve bill that was critical to things that take a couple of years lead time for a nuclear plant, like purchasing uranium and fuel, also spent fuel management. Those things take a couple of years to get contracts in place and procure and so forth. We also, it was important to stand back up the license renewal project team. So repurposing some of our team members, hiring in help and support by vendors for that license renewal process takes some time and some planning and so forth that Tom will get into in a second here. And then we looked at all the different regulatory processes and some of the funding mechanisms that were being put out last year, particularly the Department of Energy's Civil Nuclear Credit Program that we applied for, and then that we were conditionally awarded in November of last year to help with the funding and the cost to continue to operate Diablo Canyon until at least 2030. So I just wanted to touch upon, the why now, the urgency, why we were called, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk some more details about the paths that we are on right now with the latest California energy policy changes.
Thanks, Maureen. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. Thanks for joining us today. So talking about the road ahead, I don't want people to think this is a done deal. We'll still need everyone's help to get across the finish line, and we still have several regulatory processes to head through. The easy way to think about it is Diablo Canyon is on 2 tracks. Because the license renewal hasn't been approved, we're also still planning for decommissioning. Diablo Canyon will decommission one day, and so we want to have that path and drive certainty into that process regardless of when that time frame is. That's something we need to do as stewards of assets. Nuclear needs to run safe, and it needs to have its end legacy be as important and as well taken care of as its operational period. And now with that, when we're focusing on continued operations, there's also 2 levers that you think about that need to be both pointed in the same direction for continued operations. One, we will be applying with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at the end of this year, and we've received a timeliness exemption from the NRC to make application by the end of this year for an extended operational period. We are applying for 20 years. So think about that as the maximum opportunity in a license period. That lever goes forward for 20 years. But in California, the state controls our operations in a number of ways. One is through cooling. The second is through the lands. We have our intake structures located on state property. The public owns the median high tide line out, so we need permission to be there. We're a tenant, and that's a discretionary action. And then the third thing is the funding. They have the power of the purse strings in California for this facility, and that's where the legislature's invested in this facility. And then Maureen had mentioned the Department of Energy credits, to which we've been conditionally approved. When we successfully earn those credits for production, those funds will then go back to the state of California to offset their initial investment. That's all needed because we are traditionally a regulated power plant, and we're not in a window in which there is any time to follow rate making to actually fund the employees, the fuel, and the items that Maureen talked about. So this bridging strategy will allow the Public Utilities Commission to embark upon a new rulemaking for how to fund Diablo Canyon in the future. So the short way to think about it is 20 years of opportunity with the nuclear regulatory process, and then the state will govern that period, because we're essentially shifting into a state contractor serving all of California instead of just PG&E customers. So our mission's broader, serving more people, and the state public policy will influence what that end date shall be. And with that, I'll turn it back to the ANS team, and we'll be happy to hear, or actually, I'm sorry, Judy's next, and then the ANS team.
That's right. Judy's next. I'd like to introduce Judy Greenwald. She's the Executive Director of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance. She's has 35 years in energy and environmental policy leadership and experience in both public and nonprofit sectors. So, Judy.
Thanks so much. Thanks to all of my co-panelists for this important webinar, and thanks for having me today. As many of you know, the Nuclear Innovation Alliance primarily focuses on advanced nuclear energy. So I'm going to focus my remarks on how what's happening at Diablo Canyon relates to the future of nuclear power. It's said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So 2 pictures must be worth 2,000 words. Hopefully you can see these 2 pictures. And they show how the nuclear energy conversation has changed. The picture on the left was taken 40 years ago at a protest against Diablo Canyon being built. And 40 years later on the right, just last year, and there you see Isabel at the mic, we saw protests to save the Diablo Canyon reactor from being shut down. And because the climate is changing, we have a new generation of activists, policymakers, and innovators who want to bring a new generation of nuclear energy to the world to protect the climate, as well as to meet our other energy and societal needs. We're starting to see the beginning of the whole of society effort that we think is essential to make advanced nuclear energy happen. Diablo Canyon and the rest of the existing nuclear plants will play a crucial role in helping meet climate and energy security goals. Out of the 92 operating reactors in the United States, almost all will be able to operate safely for up to 80 years. And as advanced nuclear reactors begin to deploy, the existing ones will serve as a bridge that continues to provide firm clean energy while the next generation of nuclear energy reaches full maturity. It's extremely important that we provide the existing commercial reactors with the tools needed to continue safe operation. And additionally, existing nuclear power plant sites would be prime candidates to host new nuclear energy deployment. I'd also like to mention the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, which is also really important recent news. The federal government introduced financial incentives for operating nuclear plants and new nuclear reactors under the IRA. Existing commercial reactors are now eligible for a production tax credit, and new reactors will be eligible for either a production tax credit or an investment tax credit. As advanced nuclear energy projects begin deployment in the middle and end of this decade, they'll serve as a clean, firm, and reliable electricity source at both a micro and utility scale. And nuclear energy can also be used to decarbonize other industries, either through cogeneration of hydrogen or through the production of clean, high-temperature heat, which is why Dow Chemical, for example, has chosen an advanced reactor to decarbonize one of their host sites. Advanced nuclear energy can also complement renewables. NIA's view is that we need every technology available to tackle climate change. Build out of new renewable projects is crucial, and we need firm low carbon sources like conventional and advanced nuclear energy to complement renewables and ensure a reliable energy grid as we transition to a low carbon future. Advanced nuclear energy is also sustainable. It will be a zero carbon reliable energy source that can run flexibly 365 days a year and is poised to contribute to achieving all 17 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It will also be even safer than existing nuclear power. Because advanced nuclear energy will be different, many states and local communities are taking another look at deploying new nuclear projects in their backyard. The reasons behind interest in advanced nuclear energy vary widely from state to state. For many states, it's more about the climate. Washington State, for example, passed a clean energy standard that included nuclear energy and is looking to deploy new nuclear reactors. For other states, it's more about managing an energy transition with economic development. Wyoming, for example, is replacing a coal-fired power plant with a nuclear reactor and using existing transmission lines and potentially other existing infrastructure. For others, it's about the need for power in places that are hard to get to. Alaska will be deploying microreactors, for example, at the Austin Air Force Base, and Puerto Rico is studying how new nuclear reactors could be deployed in an island environment. And others are taking advantage of their nuclear expertise and facilities to work on the next generation of reactors. Idaho, for example, is leading the charge by hosting 4 advanced reactor projects by 2030 at Idaho National Lab's extensive site. For more information on advanced nuclear energy, please visit the NIA website and see some of our resources like our advanced reactor deployment map of the projects that are expected to deploy this decade. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, great. I'll invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras now, and we've got a fair number of good questions, and as with most moderators, I will take the privilege to kind of combine and prioritize some of these questions. But we'll start out with something that I'm very interested in, and we've gotten several questions on, and that is the advocacy question. And this was originally directed to Isabel, and there was another similar question directed to Tom and Maureen, so I'll kind of combine them. The fight is probably not over. There's lots of opportunities for this to go off the rails. So maybe to begin with Isabel and maybe Tom and Maureen as well, what are the different advocacy groups, both positive and negative, saying about the life extension, and where do we think we need to go for continued advocacy in this area? Maybe start with Isabel.
So I have a different philosophy in advocacy. I don't like to be, against a certain group or attack them. I believe that highlighting the positives of Diablo Canyon is the most powerful advocacy tool. And I believe that most people nowadays are on board, including organizations that have been historically anti-nuclear. Some of the biggest ones are now not opposing it. They're not in favor of it by no means, but they're not opposing it as much, because I think they also realize that the biggest enemy here is not nuclear, it is fossil fuels. And the priority is to phase out of fossil fuels. So I think that for those organizations, just keep highlighting the importance of Diablo Canyon, not only for California's grid, but for a clean energy future. And the other organizations that, are actively fighting against, let them continue their path and hope there is room for conversation, because I think at the end of the day, we all agree on the same thing, which is that we want to live in a better planet. But that's my philosophy. I think that some other folks might have different ideas.
Well, just to build on that, Isabel, I completely agree. And I don't think the language of things like fight are helpful. And we try not to frame it that way. It's a sincere policy discussion about how we help power 40 million Californians and how we reduce impacts to the climate. And it's those types of discussions when there's room for people to be heard and achieve a common goal, it's far more effective. I know it's hard, and we like to use the word fight, but you can think of it as a struggle and something that's rigorous. But when we're trying to win the hearts and minds of people with something, the fight construct doesn't really lend itself to a successful long-term outcome.
And what do you
Yeah,
think?
I would extend that to the debate about nuclear power more broadly. At least our organization, I think many of us, we are not saying that we only need nuclear power. We're saying we need clean energy, including nuclear power. And I think it's important that we build as many alliances as we can with people who have the goals of saving the planet, as Isabel mentioned.
And just to build on that as well, Seaver put out a great post a while ago with a little cartoon showing the treadmill of decarbonization. And I totally agree with Judy. I'm not only focused on nuclear power. I think that we need all the clean energy we can get our hands on, not only in the United States, but globally. And it is a mistake to pit this fight, right? Again, like have those different sources of clean energy fighting, because at the end of the day, if you keep replacing one source of clean energy with another source, you end up in the same place, and we're not displacing fossil fuels. So I think that creating, an environment where we can bring up to people's attention that that's what we're doing, and that's not our goal, and that, as Judy mentioned again, we want all the clean energy we can get. I think that might lead to some fruitful conversations.
Great.
And to sort of to add on to what everyone's been saying, I do think it is useful to be firm about challenging sort of some of the assumptions that led to the decision to retire Diablo Canyon, sort of making clear what the reality is now and what the consequences of being wrong and making the wrong decision would be. And also sort of really emphasizing that, with the importance of the climate challenge, that we don't want to risk being hypocritical. It's strange to allow, for example, gas peaker plants to use seawater for once-through cooling, but not allow Diablo Canyon to use, which is a clean source of energy, to use seawater cooling for once-through cooling. Or, to point out sort of politely some flaws in how people think about aspects of the decision to continue operating Diablo Canyon. So, for example, I'm an oceanographer by my academic training, and compared to other risks that ocean life face, like fishing, climate change, ocean acidification, marine pollution, coastal habitat loss, allowing Diablo Canyon to use seawater for cooling is really negligible, and considering the climate benefit that the plant offers, you have to sort of consider these trade-offs holistically. And so I think it's important to be clear where we agree with where we have sort of shared values with people who maybe have doubts about the plant, but also sort of be clear about sort of what we disagree on, and sort of have that sort of objective, rational conversation about what the pros and cons of the plant of the path moving forward are.
Okay. That actually kind of leads us nicely into another one of our questions. Again, I'm kind of combining a couple questions, but the MIT Stanford study, as most of you will recall, did an analysis of a 10-year extension, but they also did the 20-year extension base case. And what do you think the likelihood is, or what would we need to do to move to a 20-year extension instead of just a 10-year extension? I'll let Tom and Maureen maybe take that first, if they're willing.
Sure. So I think we described that already. We want to preserve the opportunity for the state by taking the licensing action with the NRC for 20 years, and that'll be our submission at the end of this calendar year. And then policymakers, that'll afford them the opportunity to do that. The second part is, we earn the right to run this plant every day. And so that's what our employees are focused on. And this conversation we're having is really built upon their work. And we want to be sure that they can, that path is what we're building on. So the safe, reliable operations allow the conversation to occur. And so that's our principal focus. So we want to be an irresistibly attractive option for the state of California.
I like that. We have a couple of kind of technical questions. One is on long-term spent fuel storage. Where are you guys on that? And do you think that may be an issue either from a advocacy and political standpoint or from a technical standpoint? Green, you can take that if you want.
Does PGA want to respond to that one first, or do you want a more broader answer on spent fuel? Actually, looks like maybe the PG&E folks are frozen.
Yeah, maybe they are. Why don't you go ahead, and then hopefully they'll come back on.
Yeah, I guess I would say on the spent fuel issue, which certainly our country needs to do more work on a more permanent solution, but our management of spent nuclear fuel as a society has been excellent. And we are doing a good job at this. It's certainly something that is important to manage very, very carefully. And it takes effort to do so, but that is something that we as a country and the industry has done a good job at. And so I think that that's an important thing that I think maybe a lot of people don't understand. And it's important to make sure that that's better understood. And then also that we also have to work on finding a permanent solution to spent nuclear fuel in the long run.
They're back.
Yeah, we're back. Sorry about that. All of a sudden, we got that terrible spinning circle of trying to connect. So I think I heard most of the question about what are we doing about spent nuclear fuel with the continued operations horizon. Is that correct? Okay, yeah. So as I mentioned, that was one of the key items that we needed to start pursuing right away last summer. That we discussed with state legislators and the governor's office, that we need that 2-year lead time. So we started those discussions after and pursued those actions for spent fuel management after Assembly Bill 180 was put into law at the end of June. So we've been working on that to secure those items. We currently have a fuel stored in our independent spent fuel storage installation system called the ISFSI. We have acronyms for everything. So we currently have, fuel stored up there that's 310 feet above sea level. We have fuel stored in our spent fuel pool as well. And we have room for extended operations for fuel due to extended operations as well. So we're confident and well on our way with dealing with the additional spent fuel because of extended operations. Tom, did you want to add anything? Or?
Just that SB 846, the enabling legislation for extended operations in California, addressed this issue from a state perspective. And we submitted a report to the California Energy Commission last week that describes our storage. On site today, we have the capacity to handle 60 years of operation of fuel and a little more.
Great. And I've found it in my advocacy work, the more you explain the incredible safety of these facilities, these ISFSI facilities, and the relatively small footprint they have, the conversation tends to be very, very effective. The more you educate people, the more you allow them to express their concerns. One question we got was, Diablo is doing the desalinization work, I believe, and couldn't that also help support the acceptance of not only Diablo, but also broader nuclear power plants, both in terms of hydrogen generation and desalinization and other important contributions to both California and the world's energy challenges? And I'll give this to Maureen and Tom, but also to everybody, because it's an important advocacy issue as well.
Sure. Stephen, we've had this conversation in our community several times, and all of our reservoirs are a little overtopping this week, so the conversation's not as strong as it was a couple of years ago. But the long story short is PG&E's not a water purveyor. We have had discussions about our existing facility that's permitted to provide its excess capacity to the community. But it's important to think of Diablo Canyon as an island. It's about an 8-mile interconnection. And so those issues belong to the County of San Luis Obispo or other water purveyors. And while there's been interest, there hasn't been an investment in the capital infrastructure or pursuing the permits or designed to deliver the water to communities. And that's on a smaller scale. There's been larger discussions at the MIT Stanford study that we looked at, and those are Herculean permitting efforts, and something that we start slow to go quick, right? Mm-hmm. So even the community project would be a viable one, but that's something that PG&E can't do alone, can't act unilaterally upon, and we're not in the business of delivering water, so we require that partner to deliver safe drinking water to someone else. The technology exists, the power supply exists. Right now, the will isn't there to deliver that, but I'm a little more keenly focused on license renewal prior to that.
Fair enough. Would the other panelists like to weigh in on that concept or question?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple quick points. I mean, first off, in terms of broader, installation of new nuclear capacity in California to support things like hydrogen production and desalination, obviously there are some obstacles in terms of state laws. California has a moratorium on new nuclear construction, and while there have been initial proposals, very recent proposals to reconsider this sort of long-standing California policy that would need to be revised in order to sort of enable that path forward. But also looking on a more global level, I think there is increasing sort of strong interest in the potential of new nuclear builds sort of globally to support polygeneration of fresh water, hydrogen, low carbon fuels. And so I think that in general, this is definitely an area to sort of watch with great interest as there are efforts sort of globally to sort of pursue these technologies in sort of versatile applications such as these.
Yeah, one thing I'll just mention is that the issue around, or the opportunity around nuclear power, is kind of the inverse of what we've got with variable renewable generation, where with variable renewable generation, it's unpredictable when it's going to actually be available. With nuclear power, it's on all the time, but sometimes you don't need it. So, or it can be on all the time, and sometimes you don't need it for the grid. So if you can do what Seaver describes as polygeneration, where you can use the energy in multiple different ways, you can take advantage of the fact that it can run all the time, at the same time making sure that it fits in with a grid that has increasing amounts of variable energy on it. So it's a really exciting opportunity and a good fit for nuclear power, and especially advanced nuclear power.
Yeah, I found in my advocacy work, the more that you can talk about these kinds of potential future applications, people get really excited.
I would just add one more, that our partners at Constellation Energy had a really good presentation at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's RIC conference last week, and they address these significant behind the meter uses of nuclear power. And I'd say they're the leaders in the United States on that, and that's a public presentation that folks might find interesting.
Okay, let's do a little bit of nuts and bolt questions for our technical audience. We've had a couple questions on what are the potential challenges and or upgrades that might need to be made to the facility to support the plant life extension with regards to equipment or earthquake preparedness or various other kinds of things that might come up in the effort to complete the license extension.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for that question, and those that asked that. That's a question we do get quite often. When you talk about the biggest challenge of getting through this process and so forth, I'd sum it up into time compression. We have, about 5 years of work to do in about 1.5 years with, before the plants, during the next 2 outages and before the current plants license expire. So what I mean by that is, one, we're confident we'll be very successful on that, but we are methodically planning all of the projects that we need to commence, the additional and other types of upgrades that are needed for extending the operations. And, what's most important is that we are very nimble through this, that we're very collaborative with talking about this. We're tenacious on this is really important with our vendors, suppliers, regulators, state agencies, supporters, and so forth as we work through this, time compression, as I call it, as the biggest challenge. Again, confident that we will be successful on this because we got to start last summer with that, first bill that passed. It's what we needed on that lead time. So we've been scheduling all that out. Regarding earthquakes and seismic safety, Diablo Canyon is seismically safe. The NRC determined in 2019 that no additional information or seismic studies were needed. However, we go over and above that. We have had for decades since we began operations a long-term seismic program. It's the most studied region in the world, definitely the United States. That we continue to do that, report out to the state of California in a process that they have and a proceeding they have annually. We have a Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee that has 12 touch points per year at Diablo Canyon. They have an extreme focus on seismic maintenance, reactor safety, and all of that. So they come to the plant 9 times a year. They have 3 public meetings. And we have various other oversight and external agencies that are continue to look at all safety aspects of the plant and what our planning is.
Thank you.
I just want to echo what Maureen said, which is that Diablo Canyon is arguably the most scrutinized nuclear power plant in the world when it comes to seismic safety, as by virtue of its unique history, and has been and has passed every sort of stage of scrutiny, has been reviewed multiple times by the NRC for seismic safety in 1991, post Fukushima, and has passed with flying colors. So and is designed to be able to withstand well in excess of the strongest ground motion that could be possible, given the faults in the region.
Yeah,
Okay.
I also would like to mention that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission seems to be signaling that they get the urgency of this and are really, we and others have been advocating for them to, of course, maintain and strengthen their safety mission, but also make sure that they do so efficiently. And they seem to be working towards that and seem to be signaling that they want this project to go through, make sure that everything is safe and all the rules are met, but that they do a process that's efficient so that we can actually make sure that the public good of maintaining this clean power can be achieved as long as it can be achieved safely in a timely fashion.
Yeah, Stephen, I'd like to build on what Judy just said. Sometimes people think license renewal is somehow a lessening of regulatory and it's not. The regulatory burden actually increases. Everything we're required to do today will be required to do in the future. Plus, there's additive regulatory requirements for aging management for systems and components. So it gets more rigorous as we move ahead in time, and that's what the license renewal application period looks at. So for instance, while we have active parts pumps, for instance, that are subject to our normal maintenance and get inspected regularly. License renewal goes a step further and looks at like the wall thickness of the pipe that serves that pump to be sure that we can say that the pipe and the pump together are safe for at least another 20 years. So thanks, Judy, for bringing that up. You know, it gets more and more rigorous to ensure the health and safety of the public. It doesn't relax in any way.
I would
Okay.
like to add a comment that I think I speak for everybody on this panel. We wouldn't be here advocating for the continued operation if we didn't think it was safe. So I think there's pretty broad consensus, scientific consensus, that the plant is safe. However, I also understand that people have questions and they should keep asking those questions. And the more clarity, even me or the general public can get on all of those provisions that are taken, I think it's very helpful. But I want to speak for everybody here on saying we are only doing this because we truly believe that the plant is safe.
Okay. I'd like to, before we run out of time, turn ourselves back to the process that we've gone through over the last few years of not only making people aware of the challenges of shutting down such an important clean energy resource, but also all the different steps in advocacy and in information and coalition building. Can each of you talk a little bit about the lessons you've learned in terms of working with people, be they government, public, journalists, etc., and what we can take away from this experience to be more proactive advocates for the industry as a whole? Why don't we start with Seaver?
Sure. Yeah, I think one really sort of key lesson that comes out of this whole process is sort of recognizing sort of the practical and pragmatic challenges of the clean energy transition. This is hard, and whereas a few years ago we may have been very sort of aspirational and like and thought that it's as simple as just plugging in new sources to replace Diablo Canyon and it all work out. Turns out it's rather challenging. Power on the grid has to flow correctly. You have to make sure that adding new sources of generation onto the grid is compatible with grid reliability and so forth. Where I think because of this process that we've been through and what California has been through in the last few years, we now sort of recognize this and sort of see, and it allows us to better appreciate the value that Diablo Canyon provides on the grid, and also understand better how we move forward from here to continue sort of maintaining California's place as a clean energy leader. And I think this has also resulted in a lot of unity across the sort of spectrum of California stakeholders, everyone from CAISO to the CPUC to CEC to PG&E to the federal government to the governor's administration to the state legislature to the U.S. federal government are all sort of now united on this issue, and sort of see the decision that California has now correctly made to keep Diablo operating as sort of the correct decision. And I think this can really be a model, not just for the nation, but for the world. And there is attention, sort of global attention on what California is doing throughout the US and throughout the world. And so I think this will be a really positive example going forward.
Yeah, Isabel, do you have some thoughts?
Well, I think I highlighted before, the importance of individual activism, of, joining some organization, writing letters to your representatives, signing petitions, showing up to rallies, talking on social media, in a friendly way, I believe. And yeah, I think the Diablo Canyon, as Silver pointed out, will serve as a great example. And I tweeted about this. I think that if nuclear power can be saved in California, it can be saved anywhere, perhaps except Germany. But I think this is a great example of just being able to change your mind with data, with new data coming in, data that highlights the importance of this power on the grid, data that it's not as easy to build more renewables. And just, again, all this data, being able to change your mind and action, really feeling like we all have a say in this, and we can change the course.
Judy, I'll go to you before.
Yeah, I'll just say a little bit, although try not to sound ageist. I do think that it's a little harder for the, I guess, older generation of environmentalists to take another look at nuclear power. A lot of us grew up being anti-nuclear, and then you sort of have to kind of step back and change your mind. I think it's hard for humans to change their minds, and it is information helps, and that is what I mean. There's not a lot of choices other than presenting the best information possible to try to change people's hearts and minds, or to change people's minds. But I think you also have to give people, I guess, permission to sort of think through this collectively, that you actually have conversations. Okay, this, I get this, you're worried about that. And I think being dismissive of people's concerns probably doesn't work, but sort of being engaged and understanding is more likely to work. I also have learned a lot from Isabel about the importance of having a sense of humor about this, which can be super helpful. And I have definitely had a lot of experience with people who grew up being anti-nuclear, and then they look at all this information of energy system modeling that indicates that we can't actually achieve our climate goals, or we are unlikely to achieve our climate goals if we don't have nuclear power, that's really compelling. And I think there are other people for whom it won't be primarily about climate, it'll be primarily about energy reliability. It'll be about what we're learning, for example, from the Ukraine situation. It's about having energy 24/7. It's about all these new energy needs that advanced nuclear can meet, like desalination, hydrogen creation, high temperature heat. It's a lot of different things. So a lot of times we'll get allies coming to the same conclusion that we need nuclear power, but for somewhat different reasons, and that's okay.
Thank you. And Maureen and Tom, I'll give you the last word. What lessons have you learned?
I think Isabel had it, one person can make a difference, but it's also that connection with the one other person that can make a difference. So we have to meet people where they want to receive their information. It used to be pretty simple, a press release, a Rotary Club, and those types of things. They're all still important, but our outreach model now, we have a nickname for it here in our office. It's called the molecule. Imagine a bad Venn diagram of like 22 circles, and we have social media, go down the list of where we try to meet people so that they're willing to receive the information where they're used to. I'll tell you though, with policymakers, there's simply no substitute for an experience. And so for any folks that are here that participate and work in a nuclear facility, inviting people to your facility in a tour program, you watch people thaw to the ideas, they see the rigor in the security in the facility, the safety, and then they have an experience. And not only do they then intellectually understand, they intuit that it's safe. And it fundamentally changes their perception accurately, I believe, about how the facilities are run. So we focus heavily on policymakers as well at the staff level, because they're your future policymakers, through the current incumbents. And we've received really good benefits from that. And Maureen has done a lot of testimony and work with trade associations and other groups as well.
And from staff level and everyone all the way up to, a few weeks ago, getting a call from the governor's office. So it was outstanding to host him here and to have him in the control room talking with our operators, going up to the ISFAC and seeing the security, how safe it was. A couple weeks before him, Lieutenant Governor. So bringing people here is very powerful, helpful, and having them have that experience as well.
And one thing we've been fortunate to do, and in a post-COVID environment now, people are acceptive of it, is our employees are wonderful ambassadors, and we sometimes do friend and family day. So while our tour program can't pick up everyone, they become the invited guest of an employee, and our communications and our security team help us put that on, and it's wildly successful. And so you think about someone and you trust them, and they take you to that place. It's been a game changer for us, and we might have 1,000 people in one day visit the facility. It's an incredible amount of work. I like to think of it as a more important investment than a lot of work.
That's great. And as much as I'd love to go on and continue this discussion and see all the really interesting things you people are doing. Unfortunately, our hour is done. So I want to thank everyone. As we mentioned before, this conversation will be the link to it will be emailed out to all the participants later in the day. And I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.